There are interviews that seem to erase themselves from history. Documents disappear, witnesses refuse to speak, and those who remember prefer to remain silent, especially when it concerns the boundary between science and what is called the otherworldly. The name of Stephen Hawking is known to everyone, a great physicist, thinker, a man who overcame not only the limitations of his body, but also the boundaries of human knowledge. He spoke about black holes, about the beginning of the universe, about the nature of time. But there was one topic that he almost always avoided in public speeches: the afterlife. In the spring of 2025, a group of researchers studying the digital archives of closed university collections discovered a strange recording. In the database of the University of Cambridge, among materials not intended for public access, there was an audio file. Its name consisted of random numbers and letters, but in the metadata it read, "Hawking, consciousness, beyond." At first it was assumed that this was a montage or a hoax, but acoustic analysis confirmed the voice indeed belonged to Stephen Hawking. Moreover, the recording was made in the early 2000s, exactly during the period when the scientist had practically refused interviews. The file contained a conversation between Hawking and an unknown interviewer. The identity of the interlocutor could not be established. His voice was altered or processed. The first 10 minutes discussed classical questions, the origin of time, the nature of gravity. But then the interviewer asked a question that changed the course of the entire conversation. "Professor, if information in a black hole does not disappear, is it possible that consciousness also persists after the death of the body?" There was a pause. The recording captures a barely audible breath of Hawking. Then he said, "This is a question I have studied more than I have publicly admitted." Then followed a monologue that for a long time was considered impossible for official science. If information is not destroyed, this concerns not only physical objects, but also cognitive patterns, memory, perception, experience. What religions call the soul may not be a separate entity, but an information structure. This structure obeys the laws of conservation. The interviewer clarified, "You are saying that consciousness can continue to exist?" Hawking's response sounded unexpectedly firm. "In a certain form, but not in the way traditional religions imagine it." He explained that he had worked on a hypothesis according to which consciousness is not a localized function of the brain, but quantum information distributed across space and time. When the body ceases to function, the information does not disappear. It transitions into another state. In this sense, death is not the end. It is a transformation. These words contradicted many of his public statements. In official interviews, Hawking often repeated that after death there is nothing. But as it turned out, in private conversations, he allowed for a completely different possibility. And this is where the strangest part begins. When the researchers began to study the properties of the audio file, they noticed something strange. In the recording, there were barely discernible sounds resembling digital markers or hidden codes. Audio forensic specialists suggested that the file had been edited or was protected to conceal certain fragments. However, the most important part remained intact. In the interview, Hawking continued, "In recent years, I consulted with a group of physicists and neurobiologists who were working on what we provisionally called the Cognitive Trace Program. The goal was simple: to find out whether consciousness could leave measurable traces after the death of the brain." He mentioned that special neurointerfaces and laser spectroscopy were used for this. Such technologies were officially applied only for studying memory. But, according to Hawking, a number of experiments yielded unexpected results. In 2 cases, we recorded anomalies. After the death of the patients, bursts of quantum activity were observed in the laboratory, which could not be explained by standard models of tissue decay. The interviewer asked, "Do you mean something like a quantum echo?" Yes, memory, feelings, possibly even fragments of personality, were preserved in the field, not in the usual sense, but in the form of patterns capable of interacting with the environment. This idea was reminiscent of Roger Penrose's theories about quantum consciousness, but Hawking went further. He proposed a hypothesis that black holes and human consciousness obey similar laws. A black hole does not destroy information, it transforms it. I came to the conclusion that consciousness follows a similar path. It does not disappear, it changes its form of existence. Then there was a long pause in the recording. The interviewer quietly asked, "Is this what the soul is?" Hawking's voice became almost a whisper. "If you remove religious interpretations, yes, it is an informational soul. It does not belong only to the body. It is part of quantum reality." At this point in the audio file, noises and distortions appeared, as if someone was trying to interrupt the recording. The researchers attempted to recover the lost fragments using spectral analysis. Some data were successfully reconstructed. In the remaining minutes, Hawking spoke about how such conclusions were too dangerous for publication. If the existence of a cognitive trace after death is confirmed, it will change everything. Philosophy, science, religion, politics. Some will use it for good, others for control. He added, "That is why I decided not to publish this data. Perhaps humanity is not ready yet." The file ended with a sharp click, a sign of the recording stopping, but the most mysterious part lay ahead. When the team of researchers studied the metadata of the file, they discovered another detail. The description contained encoded coordinates. Initially, they were taken as a random set of numbers, but when the coordinates were entered into a mapping system, they pointed to a laboratory complex near Geneva. It was one of the experimental bases associated with CERN. Officially, this base was used for testing magnetic systems, but independent sources claimed that in the early 2000s, a closed group of scientists operated there under the leadership of Dr. Mark Euler, a physicist who had previously collaborated with Hawking. The researchers decided to check CERN's archives. After several months of requests and legal procedures, they gained partial access to declassified data. Among them were reports marked Cognitive Echo Project, dated 2002 and 2003. One of the reports stated, "During experiment number 14, anomalous quantum radiation was recorded at the moment of the clinical death of the subject. The radiation continued for 4 minutes after the documented cessation of cardiac and brain activity." Another document contained a phrase that shocked even the skeptics. "The probability of spontaneous signal generation in laboratory conditions is less than 1/1,000,000%. The recorded phenomenon corresponds to the cognitive trace hypothesis." This was an indirect hint that Hawking was not just speculating about the possibility of the existence of the soul. He and his colleagues had already observed phenomena that could be manifestations of consciousness after death. But why had this information never become public knowledge? The answer turned out to be frighteningly simple. Dr. Mark Euler disappeared in 2004. His trail went cold. Soon after, all employees of the Cognitive Echo Project group were either dismissed or reassigned. All project materials were classified. In CERN's official reports, there were no mentions of the project after 2003. Some members of the research team working on decrypting Hawking's interview began receiving anonymous warnings. They were advised to stop the investigation. One of the audio forensics experts suddenly refused to continue working and left the country. However, part of the team decided to continue. They were convinced that the information Hawking had left in the audio file was too important to be buried again. Meanwhile, analysis of the original file revealed a hidden digital message. It consisted of simple words: Consciousness is not a function, it is a path. These words became the key to the next discovery. When the team decrypted the hidden message, they realized that Hawking was not merely conveying a scientific hypothesis. He had left an indication of the existence of a certain process, a path that consciousness continues after physical death. One of the researchers, Dr. Lewis Harding, a specialist in quantum informatics, proposed a theory. If consciousness is indeed an informational structure, as Hawking had suggested, then after death it might transition into what is called a quantum memory field. This is a hypothetical state where patterns of personality do not disappear, but continue to exist in the form of waves or even interact with each other. Harding recalled the work not only of Penrose, but also the early theories of John Wheeler, according to which the universe might possess the ability to remember information. If this was true, then consciousness does not merely persist, it may reincarnate. The team began searching for matches between data from CERN's experimental archives and real cases of unusual memories reported by people. They turned to the database of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, where for more than 50 years, testimonies of children remembering past lives had been collected. The coincidences were alarming. In 13 cases, children described events related to places and individuals that had previously been documented in the cognitive echo projects and similar studies. For example, a 6-year-old boy from Texas described in detail experiments involving magnetic traps in the Geneva laboratory, even though his family had no connection to science or Europe. A girl from California recalled sequences of numbers that matched the test codes from the Cognitive Echo project. These data could not be dismissed as mere coincidences. Dr. Harding concluded that if the information of consciousness truly persists, it can be picked up by new carriers, children whose neural networks resonate with the quantum traces of past consciousness. This explained both the cases of spontaneous memory and the phenomena of so-called returned souls. But one question remained unanswered. Why did some consciousnesses persist and return, while others vanished? The answer was once again found in hidden files. In the last segment of the audio recording, long considered corrupted, a short fragment was recovered. Not all patterns are compatible. Only those that carry development continue. The others are erased. This is the natural selection of consciousness. Hawking was not merely acknowledging the existence of the soul. He was proposing that the process of its rebirth was governed by the laws of the evolution of information. This was the scientific equivalent of reincarnation, and this discovery changed everything. After the publication of the initial findings by the research group, a wave of criticism arose within the narrow scientific community. Official representatives of the University of Cambridge and CERN stated that such hypotheses fall outside the bounds of verifiable science. Some physicists and psychologists labeled Harding's team's work as dangerous speculation. However, there were those in academic circles who supported the research. Professor Karen Blake, a neurophysiology specialist from Princeton, stated, "Modern science is too afraid of questions that challenge traditional dogmas, but if we ignore phenomena that do not fit into our models, we limit our own development." While the debates continued, the researchers discovered a new lead. Among CERN's documents, there was a report marked Class C. This was the lowest level of secrecy, so gaining access proved easier. The report described an experiment conducted in 2002 in which people with unusual cognitive abilities participated. These participants did not merely possess exceptional memory or intelligence. They exhibited cases of spontaneous recollections of events to which they could have had no connection. The document contained the phrase, "A group of carriers of cognitive patterns with signs of memory transfer. The probability of random coincidences, less than 1/1,000,000th." But the most striking detail, the report mentioned the term the chosen eight. This echoed the phrase from Hawking's audio recording, "Consciousness is a path. Only compatible patterns continue." Harding and his colleagues realized that it was possibly referring to a group of people whose consciousnesses were not only preserved, but were intentionally guided to perform a specific task in the future. The theory seemed fantastic, but subsequent events forced a reconsideration of skepticism. Over the course of 2 years, the team recorded an increase in cases of so-called reincarnation memory among children worldwide. Such cases were especially frequent in the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan. Many of these children displayed not only memories, but also remarkable abilities in mathematics, music, and engineering. Some of them spoke of tasks they needed to accomplish, though they could not explain what those tasks were. Dr. Harding contacted the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Joint research revealed that most of these children were born during periods coinciding with significant social and technological changes. As Hawking had predicted, the consciousnesses were not returning randomly. They were part of an evolutionary process, and this was not the end of the discoveries. Meanwhile, Harding's team continued to collect data. The number of confirmed cases of reincarnation memory in children continued to grow. Unusual memories and abilities appeared especially often in those born during periods of social and technological change. These children did not just recall past lives. Many of them demonstrated outstanding abilities in mathematics, music, engineering, and even scientific concepts that no one in their families had ever discussed. Some spoke of missions or tasks that they needed to accomplish, although they themselves did not always understand what exactly this meant. Harding and his colleagues concluded consciousnesses returned not by chance. This was a guided evolutionary process. Soon the term compatible consciousnesses began to appear more and more frequently in their research, those who, by an unknown mechanism, preserved memories and abilities from past lives to accomplish tasks in the present. But the most unexpected event was the appearance of an anonymous source. One day Harding received an encrypted message. It contained the phrase, "Hawking knew more than you think. This is not the end. This is the beginning." Attached to the letter was a file titled Protocol of the Evolution of Consciousness. Inside was a document outlining a theory developed by Hawking together with a small group of physicists, neurobiologists, and philosophers. The document stated, "Consciousness is not a product of the brain, but a basic structure of reality. Black holes and consciousness obey the same laws of information preservation. The soul is an informational pattern that evolves through the experience of life and death. Only those consciousnesses that contribute to development continue. The others disappear. During periods of crisis, compatible consciousnesses return to help humanity take the next step." At the end of the document was Hawking's signature and his words, "The fear of death is the fear of losing form. But information does not disappear. We do not die. We transform." These revelations explained many things: phenomena of spontaneous memory, inexplicable abilities of children, and the synchronicity of the appearance of individuals who changed the course of history. But they also pointed to possible risks. Control over such knowledge could turn into a weapon. Harding's team decided not to keep the information secret. Soon their findings were published in open sources. The research caused a huge public outcry. Millions of people began to question their own memories, fears, and the phenomenon of déjà vu. For many, this became not just a scientific hypothesis, but a new paradigm of thinking. And, as Hawking predicted, this was only the beginning. If this story made you think, support us with a like, write your opinion in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. More discoveries lie ahead that could change our understanding of life, death, and destiny. Because the story of the soul is the story of all humanity, and it continues.